Margaret Thompson had been the perfect neighbor for as long as anyone could remember. At 73 years old, with silver hair always neatly arranged and a warm smile that seemed permanently etched on her weathered face, she embodied everything people hoped for in the person living next door. Her small, well-maintained house on Maple Street had become a fixture of comfort and reliability in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Millbrook. For 20 years, Margaret had been the unofficial guardian angel of the street. She was a neighbor who brought fresh-baked cookies to new families, who collected mail and watered plants when people went on vacation, who always seemed to appear at a casserole whenever someone fell ill. Children in the neighborhood knew they could count on Mrs. Thompson for Band-Aids when they scraped their knees, and teenagers trusted her to keep their minor secrets from worried parents. But Margaret Thompson was keeping a secret of her own, one so devastating that it had been eating away at her soul for 2 decades. A secret that involved a family who had lived next door to her for the past 15 years. The Williams family, who had no idea that their beloved neighbor held the key to the most painful mystery of their lives. The Williams family had moved to Maple Street in 2008, drawn by the quiet neighborhood and the promise of a fresh start. David Williams, a high school teacher, and his wife Sarah, a part-time librarian, had been searching for the perfect place to raise their children after David's job transfer brought them to Millbrook. They had 2 kids at the time, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jake, both excited about the adventure of a new house and new friends. From the day they moved in, Margaret had been a godsend. She helped Sarah navigate the best local grocery stores and pediatricians, watched the children when David and Sarah had to handle moving logistics, and quickly became not just a neighbor, but a trusted friend. The kids adored her, calling her Grammy Maggie, and spending countless afternoons in her kitchen, learning to bake cookies, and listening to stories about the neighborhood's history. What the Williams family didn't know was that Margaret's extraordinary kindness toward them wasn't just neighborly generosity. It was driven by a crushing guilt that haunted her every waking moment for years before they even moved to the street. The secret that Margaret carried dated back to March 15th, 2003, a date that was burned into her memory with painful clarity. On that cold Friday evening, Margaret had been driving home from her weekly bridge game at the community center, a routine she had maintained for over a decade since her husband Harold's death in 1995. Margaret had always been a careful driver, especially at night when her aging eyes struggled with the glare of oncoming headlights. But on that particular evening, she had been distracted by troubling news about her sister's cancer diagnosis, received just hours before her card game. Lost in worried thoughts about family and mortality, Margaret had failed to notice the stop sign at the intersection of Maple Street and Oak Avenue until it was too late. The impact happened in slow motion, the way traumatic events often seem to unfold. Margaret's sedan struck the passenger side of a small blue Honda that was traveling through the intersection with the right-of-way. The sound of crushing metal and shattering glass seemed to echo forever in the quiet residential evening. When Margaret stumbled out her car, shaken but miraculously uninjured thanks to her seatbelt and the relatively low speed of both vehicles, she saw immediately that the other driver hadn't been as fortunate. The Honda's driver, a young woman probably in her early 20s, was slumped unconscious over the steering wheel, blood trickling from a head wound. Margaret's nursing training from her younger years kicked in automatically. She checked the woman's pulse, weak but present, and carefully positioned her to keep her airway clear, while shouting for someone to call 911. In those crucial minutes before the paramedics arrived, Margaret held a stranger's hand and whispered reassuring words, praying desperately that the injuries weren't as serious as they appeared. The young woman's name was Lisa Chun, and she was 24 years old, recently engaged to her college sweetheart, and working as a kindergarten teacher at Millbrook Elementary. She had been on her way home from a school event, her car filled with art supplies for Monday's classroom activities that were now scattered across the intersection like colorful confetti. Lisa survived the initial impact and the ambulance ride to Regional Medical Center, but she never regained consciousness. After 3 days on life support, with her devastated fiancé and parents maintaining a constant vigil, Lisa's family made the heartbreaking decision to let her go. She died on March 18, 2003, with her loved ones surrounding her bed, just 4 months before her planned wedding. Margaret caused a fatal accident, and she knew it. The police investigation was thorough, but ultimately ruled the crash an unfortunate accident. Margaret hadn't been drinking, wasn't speeding excessively, and had no history of reckless driving. The stop sign at that intersection was partially obscured by an overgrown tree branch, something the city quickly corrected after the accident. Legally, Margaret faced only a minor citation for failure to yield right away. But legal absolution couldn't touch the crushing weight of moral responsibility that settled on Margaret's shoulders like a lead blanket. She had taken the life of a vibrant young woman who was just beginning her adult life, a teacher who worked with children, someone with dreams and plans, and people who loved her desperately. The funeral was the worst day of Margaret's life. She sat in the back of the crowded church, watching Lisa's fiancé, a young man named Michael Chun, deliver a eulogy that painted a picture of the wonderful life that had been cut short. Lisa's students had made drawings that covered the altar, stick figures holding hands with a smiling teacher whose black hair was always drawn with careful precision. Margaret learned things about Lisa that made her death even more devastating to contemplate. She had been planning to propose new reading programs for struggling students. She volunteered at a local animal shelter on weekends. She had been saving money to take her aging parents on a trip to China to meet their extended family. She wanted children of her own and had already picked out names. Emma for a girl, Jake for a boy. If this story truly touches your heart, let it speak for you. Like this video, subscribe to be part of our journey, and share your feelings in the comments. The names hit Margaret like physical blows. Emma, Jake, the children Lisa would never have. The family that would never exist because of Margaret's momentary inattention at a stop sign. In the weeks following the funeral, Margaret tried to find ways to make amends. She sent anonymous donations to the scholarship fund established in Lisa's memory. She volunteered at the animal shelter where Lisa had worked. She even wrote letters to Lisa's family. Letters she never sent, recognizing that her attempt at condolence would only cause additional pain to people already devastated by loss. But nothing Margaret did could lift the weight of what she had done. She stopped driving at night, then stopped driving altogether except for essential errands. She withdrew from her social activities, canceled her bridge games, and began living an increasingly isolated life dominated by guilt and regret. Years passed, and Margaret learned to function with her secret, but she never learned to live with it. Every morning when she woke up, the first thought that entered her mind was Lisa Chen's face in those final moments before the paramedics arrived. Every night when she tried to sleep, she pictured the wedding that would never happen, the children Lisa would never teach, the parents who would never stop grieving their daughter. Then, in 2008, the Williams family moved into the house next door, and Margaret's carefully contained grief exploded into something much more complicated. David and Sarah Williams had moved to Millbrook to start fresh after their own tragedy. In 2007, Sarah had suffered miscarriage late in her pregnancy, losing the daughter they had already named Emma. The loss had been devastating for both of them, but particularly for Sarah, who had struggled with depression and anxiety in the months that followed. When Margaret learned about the Williams family's loss, shared during one of their early conversations over the fence between their yards, she felt as though fate was playing a cruel joke. Here was a family grieving a daughter named Emma, the same name Lisa Chun had chosen for her future daughter. Here was Sarah Williams, struggling with the loss of a child she would never get to raise, while Margaret carried the guilt of having prevented Lisa from ever becoming a mother at all. Margaret's response to learning about the Williams family's tragedy was immediate and intense. She threw herself into caring for them with an almost desperate energy, as if her kindness could somehow balance the cosmic scales of the harm she had caused. She became their most reliable support system, babysitting Emma and Jake when David and Sarah needed time to heal, providing meals during Sarah's difficult periods, and offering the kind of steady, unconditional care that helped the family rebuild their emotional foundation. But every act of kindness toward the Williams family intensified Margaret's internal torment. When she bandaged Jake's scraped knee, she thought about how Lisa would never comfort her own injured child. When she helped Emma with homework, she remembered Lisa's love for teaching and her dreams of innovative classroom programs. When she baked cookies with the children, she pictured Lisa's wedding cake that was never made, the birthday cakes for children who were never born. The worst moments came during family celebrations. When Emma celebrated her 10th birthday with a backyard party that Margaret helped organize, all Margaret could think about was that Lisa Chung would have been 34 that year, possibly celebrating her own child's birthday. When Jake graduated from elementary school, with Margaret cheering from the audience, she calculated that Lisa had been dead for longer than Jake had been alive. As the years passed, Margaret's guilt evolved into something more complex. She genuinely loved the Williams family. They had become the children and grandchildren she had never had, filling her empty house with purpose and laughter. But that love was contaminated by the knowledge that she was deceiving them every day, accepting their gratitude and affection, while hiding the fact that she had destroyed another family through her carelessness. The secret became more unbearable as Margaret watched Emma and Jake grow up. Emma developed into an artistic, sensitive teenager who reminded Margaret painfully of the creative kindergarten teacher she had killed. Jake became interested in engineering, just as Lisa's fiancé Michael had been. Every milestone in their lives was a reminder of the milestones Lisa would never reach. Margaret began having panic attacks during routine interactions with the family. When Sarah thanked her for watching the children, Margaret's heart would race with the knowledge that she didn't deserve such trust. When David invited her to join them for holiday meals, she would have to excuse herself to the bathroom to steady her breathing. The children's innocent affection felt like accusations to Margaret's guilt-ridden conscience. By 2020, Margaret's secret had been eating away at her for 17 years, and the isolation of the COVID-19 pandemic gave her too much time alone with her thoughts. Confined to her house for months with minimal social contact, Margaret found herself reliving the accident with increasing frequency and intensity. She would wake up at night hearing the sound of crushing metal, see Lisa's face in every young woman she passed on her essential trips to the grocery store. The Williams family became even more important to Margaret during the pandemic. They were part of her bubble, the only people she saw regularly, and their kindness during her isolation felt like both salvation and torture. Emma, now a high school senior, would deliver groceries to Margaret's door and chat with her through the window. Jake, a sophomore, would shovel her driveway without being asked and accept only cookies as payment. But the increased contact with the family also intensified Margaret's psychological distress. Every conversation felt like a lie by omission. Every expression of gratitude felt undeserved, and every moment of genuine affection felt like a betrayal of Lisa Chen's memory. The breaking point came in March 2023, exactly 20 years after the accident. Margaret had developed a ritual of private mourning on the anniversary, spending the day alone in her house, looking through newspaper clippings about Lisa's death and the scholarship fund that continued in her memory. But this particular anniversary felt different, heavier somehow, as if the 20-year milestone carried special significance. That evening, as Margaret sat in her darkened living room surrounded by reminders of Lisa's short life, she heard laughter from the Williams' backyard. Emma and Jake were home from college for spring break, and the family was having a barbecue to celebrate the beautiful weather. Margaret watched through her window as they played games, shared stories, and enjoyed the kind of ordinary family happiness that Lisa Chung would never experience. Something broke inside Margaret that night. The contrast between the Williams family's joy and her own decades of hidden anguish became unbearable. She realized that she couldn't carry the secret any longer. It was destroying her sanity and poisoning every relationship in her life with deception. But Margaret also understood that revealing her secret would likely destroy the relationships that had become most important to her. The Williams family trusted her, loved her, and depended on her. Learning that their beloved neighbor had killed someone in a car accident, especially someone who might have had children named Emma and Jake, would shatter their trust and probably end their relationship forever. Margaret spent the next several weeks wrestling with the decision. She consulted with her pastor, though without revealing the specific details of her situation. She even made an appointment with therapists, her first in decades, to discuss whether confession was psychologically necessary or just selfishly motivated. The therapist, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, helped Margaret understand that secrets of this magnitude don't just affect the secret keeper. They create invisible barriers in relationships, preventing genuine intimacy and forcing the secret keeper to live authentically only in isolation. The question isn't whether revealing the secret will cause pain, Dr. Rodriguez explained during one of their sessions. The question is whether continuing to hide it is causing more pain in the long run, both for you and for the people who care about you. Margaret realized that her 20 years of excessive kindness toward the Williams family had been driven partly by genuine affection, but also by guilt-motivated overcompensation. She had been trying to balance the cosmic scales by giving the love and care she had stolen from Lisa-chan, but this approach had created a relationship built partly on deception. The decision to confess crystallized for Margaret on a warm Saturday morning in May 2023. She was in her garden, planting the tomatoes that Sarah had helped her choose at the nursery, when Emma stopped by to borrow some sugar for a baking project. "You know, Grammy Maggie," Emma said, using the childhood nickname that still made Margaret's heart ache with love and guilt. "I've been thinking about how lucky our family is to have you. Moving here after losing the baby was so hard for Mom, but having you next door made all the difference. You're like the grandmother I never had." Emma's innocent expression of gratitude was the final straw. Margaret realized that she couldn't accept such love under false pretenses any longer, and that the Williams family deserved to know the truth about the person they had trusted with their hearts and their children for 15 years. That evening, Margaret called Sarah and asked if she and David could come over for coffee. "There's something I need to tell you both," she said, her voice shaking with 20 years of suppressed emotion. "Something important about my past that affects our friendship." Sarah and David arrived at Margaret's house an hour later, bringing the homemade cookies that Emma had baked with the borrowed sugar. They settled into Margaret's cozy living room, surrounded by photos of neighborhood children and family celebrations that Margaret had been included in over the years. Margaret had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times in her mind, but when the moment came to actually speak the words, her carefully planned speech abandoned her. Instead, she simply began with the truth. 20 years ago, I killed someone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips, and David's expression shifted from casual attention to sharp focus. Margaret could see them trying to process her words, to determine whether they had misheard or misunderstood. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked finally, her voice careful and concerned. Margaret told them everything. She described the bridge game, her sister's cancer diagnosis, the distraction that led to running the stop sign. She talked about Lisa Chun, her age, her profession, her plans for the future, her death 3 days after the accident. She explained about the funeral, the scholarship fund, and the 20 years of guilt that had shaped every day of her life since. As Margaret spoke, she watched David and Sarah's faces change. Initial shock gave way to confusion, then to a complex mixture of emotions that seemed to shift moment by moment. When Margaret reached the part about Lisa's planned children's names, Emma and Jake, Sarah gasped audibly and reached for David's hand. "That's why you've been so—" Sarah started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "So kind to us," David completed, his teacher's analytical mind beginning to process the implications. "Your relationship with our family has been shaped by guilt over this accident." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I've loved you all genuinely," she said. "But yes, the guilt has been part of it too. I've been trying to give your family the love and care that I took away from Lisa-chan when I killed her. I've been trying to be the grandmother to Emma and Jake that Lisa's parents will never get to be to their grandchildren." The conversation continued for over 3 hours, with Margaret answering every question David and Sarah asked about the accident, Lisa's life, and the impact the secret had had on Margaret's mental health over the decades. She showed them newspaper clippings about Lisa, photos from the scholarship fund ceremonies, and letters she had written but never sent to Lisa's family. David and Sarah's initial response was compassionate but complicated. They were deeply moved by Margaret's obvious pain and remorse, but they were also processing the realization that their most trusted neighbor had been deceiving them about something fundamental for their entire friendship. "I need to understand something," Sarah said as the evening wound down. "Are you telling us this because you want forgiveness, or because you think we deserve to know the truth?" It was a penetrating question that Margaret had asked herself repeatedly during her weeks of preparation. "Both," she answered honestly. "I can't carry this secret anymore. It's destroying me. But also, you've all become so important to me that I can't stand having our relationship built partly on deception. You deserve to know who you're trusting with your children and your friendship." David asked a question that Margaret had been dreading. "What do you want from us now? What happens to our relationship after this?" "I don't know," Margaret replied. "I understand if you can't trust me anymore, if you don't want me around Emma and Jake. I understand if knowing this changes how you feel about me. I just couldn't keep lying to you by omission." Sarah and David asked for time to process Margaret's confession before deciding how to move forward. They thanked her for her honesty and left her house that night with promises to continue the conversation once they had absorbed the magnitude of what they had learned. Margaret spent the following days in a state of emotional exhaustion mixed with profound relief. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't carrying her secret alone. The Williams family knew the truth about her, and while she didn't know what that meant for their future relationship, she no longer had to manage the cognitive dissonance of accepting their love while hiding such a fundamental part of her history. 3 days later, Sarah called and asked if she could visit Margaret alone. She arrived that afternoon with a photo album that Margaret had never seen before. Pictures of Sarah's pregnancy with the daughter they had lost, ultrasound images, and nursery preparations that had never been used. "After you told us about Lisa Chun, I kept thinking about names," Sarah said, settling onto Margaret's couch with the photo album between them. "We had chosen Emma for our daughter before she died, but we never told you that we had also picked out a boy's name, Jacob, which we would have called Jake." Margaret stared at the ultrasound images of the daughter Sarah had never gotten a raise, the child who would have been 15 years old by now. The coincidence of names felt less like cruel fate and more like an inexplicable connection between losses separated by years but linked by the randomness of tragedy. "I've been angry since you told us," Sarah continued. "Not angry at you specifically, but angry at the universe, at the waste of it all. Lisa Chen should have lived to have her children. Our daughter should have lived to grow up. You should have been able to live without this terrible guilt for 20 years. Sarah opened the photo album to a page showing the nursery they prepared. Yellow walls because they hadn't learned the baby's sex, a crib that had been donated to charity after miscarriage, stuffed animals that had been packed away in the attic. "But I've also been thinking about forgiveness," Sarah said. "Not forgiving you for the accident. That's not mine to give. That belongs to Lisa's family. But forgiving you for not telling us sooner, for letting guilt shape our relationship, for carrying this burden alone when we could have helped you carry it." Margaret began crying again, overwhelmed by Sarah's compassion and wisdom. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "Maybe not," Sarah agreed, "but I'm giving it anyway, because holding on to anger won't bring back Lisa Chun or our daughter, and because you've been genuinely good to our family for 15 years, regardless of your motivations." The conversation with Sarah became the first step in a long process of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. David's response was more complicated. As a teacher, he struggled with the idea that Margaret had been around their children without them knowing about her past. But he also recognized that Margaret's remorse was genuine and that her care for Emma and Jake had always been authentic, even if it was motivated partly by guilt. Emma and Jake's responses, when their parent eventually told them an age-appropriate version of Margaret's story, surprised everyone. Emma, now 18 and headed to college in the fall, was initially hurt that Margaret had kept such a significant secret. But she was also moved by the depth of Margaret's remorse and her dedication to honoring Lisa's memory through her support of their family. "I wish you had told us sooner," Emma told Margaret during an emotional conversation in the garden where they had planted vegetables together for years. "Not because I'm angry, but because you shouldn't have had to carry something so heavy by yourself." Jake, 16 and more straightforward in his emotional processing, simply hugged Margaret and said, "You're still Grammy Maggie to me. People make mistakes, even terrible ones, but that doesn't erase all the good they do afterward." The family's decision to maintain their relationship with Margaret, while adjusting it to accommodate the new reality of shared knowledge, became a powerful example of forgiveness in action. They established new boundaries. Margaret would continue to be part of their lives, but with the understanding that her past would always be part of their relationship dynamic. Margaret also made the difficult decision to reach out to Lisa Chen's family. 20 years after the accident, with the help of a grief counselor and the support of the Williams family, she wrote a letter to Lisa's parents expressing her remorse and describing the scholarship contributions she had made in Lisa's memory over the years. The response from Lisa's family was mixed. Her parents, now in their 70s, appreciated Margaret's letter but weren't ready for direct contact. Lisa's former fiancé, Michael, who had eventually married and had children of his own, agreed to meet with Margaret once to discuss the accident and its long-term impact on both their lives. The meeting between Margaret and Michael took place at a coffee shop near the school where Lisa had taught, with Dr. Rodriguez facilitating the conversation. It was emotionally difficult for both of them, but it provided Margaret with the opportunity to express her remorse directly to someone who had been devastated by her actions, and it gave Michael a chance to ask questions about the accident that had haunted him for 2 decades. "I don't forgive you," Michael told Margaret at the end of their conversation. "I'm not ready for that, and I may never be. But I appreciate that you've carried the weight of this for 20 years, and I'm glad that Lisa's memory has motivated you to help other families. She would like knowing that some good came from her death." The conversation with Michael didn't provide the absolution Margaret had hoped for, but it did give her a sense of completion that had been missing from her decades of private guilt. She had finally spoken directly to someone whose life had been shattered by her actions, offered what accountability she could, and had learned that healing doesn't always include forgiveness, but can include acknowledgement and continued dedication to honoring the harm that was done. A year after Margaret's confession to the Williams family, their relationship had evolved into something deeper and more authentic than it had been before. The secret that had poisoned Margaret's peace of mind for 20 years was now a shared reality that brought them closer together rather than driving them apart. Margaret continued to be involved in Emma and Jake's lives, but with a different understanding of her role. Instead of being driven by guilt-motivated overcompensation, her care for them now flowed from a place of genuine love, tempered by awareness of life's fragility and the preciousness of the relationships we're given. Emma wrote her college application essay about forgiveness and second chances, inspired partly by Margaret's story and partly by her own growth in understanding complex moral situations. Jake began volunteering at a local memorial garden, motivated by Margaret's example of turning guilt into service to others. Sarah and David's marriage, which had been strengthened by navigating their miscarriage together, was further deepened by their shared decision to respond to Margaret's confession with compassion rather than judgment. They began volunteering together for a local victims' rights organization, inspired by their experience supporting Margaret through her long-delayed truth-telling. Margaret herself experienced a psychological transformation that Dr. Rodriguez described as remarkable. The depression and anxiety that had plagued her for 20 years didn't disappear completely, but they were no longer compounded by the exhausting work of secret-keeping. She began sleeping better, engaging more fully with her community, and finding ways to honor Lisa's memory that felt constructive rather than torturous. On the 21st anniversary of Lisa's death, Margaret visited her grave for the first time since the funeral. She brought flowers and a letter describing the Williams family and the ways that Lisa's memory had motivated Margaret to care for Emma and Jake. She also brought photos of the scholarship recipients who had been supported by the fund established in Lisa's honor, young teachers who were continuing Lisa's work with children. "I can't bring you back," Margaret said aloud at Lisa's graveside, her words carrying across the quiet cemetery. "I can't give you the life you should have had, the children you wanted, the years with Michael that I took away. But I can promise that your memory will continue to motivate me to love the people in my life more fully, to support young teachers like you were, and to never take for granted the precious responsibility of driving safely." The Williams family joined Margaret at the cemetery that day, bringing their own flowers and standing with her in a moment of shared remembrance for someone they had never met, but whose death had shaped all their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. As they stood together at Lisa's grave, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in 21 years. Peace. Not the peace that comes from forgetting or moving on, but the peace that comes from living authentically with the full weight of one's actions, surrounded by people who know the truth and choose love anyway. If you made it all the way here, it means this story truly held you. So don't leave without showing some love. Hit like, subscribe to stay with us, and drop a comment. I'll be here, reading every word you share. Sarah Martinez stared at the medical report in her trembling hands, the words blurring through her tears. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live, maybe less. The paper crinkled as her grip tightened, and she looked across the sterile hospital waiting room at her younger sister Emma, who was laughing with her 3 children, completely oblivious to the death sentence hidden in that manila envelope. Emma had always been the golden child, the one with the infectious smile and boundless energy. At 28, she was raising 3 beautiful kids on her own after her husband died in a car accident 2 years prior. 7-year-old Miguel, 5-year-old Sophia, and 3-year-old little Carlos were her entire world, and Emma had been doing an incredible job as a single mother despite the financial struggles. That's why Emma had come to Sarah in the first place, complaining about persistent stomach pain and fatigue. "I think I'm just stressed," Emma had said, brushing off Sarah's concerns. "Single parenting is exhausting, you know." But Sarah knew her sister, and this wasn't normal exhaustion. She'd practically dragged Emma to the doctor, insisting on coming along for moral support. Now Sarah sat with the devastating truth, while Emma played peekaboo with Carlos, making him giggle uncontrollably. The doctor had asked to speak with Sarah privately, explaining that Emma's condition was already too advanced for treatment to make any meaningful difference. They could make her comfortable, but there was no saving her. "What are you going to tell her?" Dr. Williams had asked gently. Sarah had stared at him, her mind racing. Tell Emma she was dying? Watch the light fade from those bright brown eyes? Force her to spend her final months in terror and despair, knowing she would leave her babies orphaned? I need time to think," Sarah had whispered. That was 3 days ago, and Sarah still hadn't found the words. How do you tell someone who's already lost everything that they're about to lose their life to? How do you destroy a mother's last precious months with her children by burdening her with the knowledge of her own mortality? Emma bounced into Sarah's apartment that evening, the kids trailing behind her like ducklings. "Thanks for watching them tonight, sis. This job interview could really change things for us." Emma's face was flushed with excitement and hope, and Sarah's heart shattered a little more. As Emma kissed each child goodbye and headed out the door, Sarah gathered Miguel, Sophia, and Carlos around her on the couch for story time. Their innocent faces looked up at her with complete trust, and she made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. She would not tell Emma about the cancer. She would not destroy these final months. Instead, she would quietly prepare to become everything these children would need when the inevitable happened. The next few weeks were a delicate dance of deception. Sarah began spending more time with the kids, subtly inserted herself deeper into their daily routines. She learned Miguel's favorite bedtime stories, Sophia's preferred hairstyles, and Carlos's naptime rituals. She memorized their dietary preferences, their fears, their dreams, their quirks. Emma, meanwhile, threw herself into job hunting with renewed vigor, unaware that her increased fatigue wasn't from stress, but from her body slowly shutting down. Sarah watched helplessly as her sister's appetite decreased and her energy waned, all while Emma attributed it to the challenges of single motherhood. "I think I'm getting a hang of this work-life balance thing," Emma said one afternoon, collapsing onto Sarah's couch after dropping the kids off. "Though I swear these little monsters are getting heavier every day." She laughed. But Sarah noticed a slight wheeze in her breathing. By the second month, Emma's symptoms were becoming harder to ignore. She was losing weight, though she claimed it was stress-induced. Her skin had taken on a slightly yellow tinge, which she dismissed as needing more sun. The stomach pain was getting worse, but she insisted it was just anxiety about money. Sarah found herself living a double life. During the day, she researched guardianship laws and quietly began the legal process of becoming the children's emergency contact. She opened a savings account specifically for their future needs and started putting aside every extra penny. In the evenings, she watched Emma slowly deteriorate while maintaining a facade of normalcy. The hardest part was watching Emma make plans for a future that would never come. She talked excitedly about Miguel starting second grade, about Sophia's upcoming dance recital, about teaching Carlos to ride a bike. Each conversation was like a knife twisting in Sarah's chest. "You know what?" Emma said one evening, her voice weak but determined. "I think we should take a family vacation next summer. Maybe Disneyland? The kids would love it, and I've been working so hard lately." She coughed, a harsh sound that made Sarah's blood run cold. "That sounds wonderful," Sarah managed to say, her voice steady despite the tears she was holding back. "The kids would absolutely love that. By the third month, Emma was having trouble hiding her illness from the children. She was napping frequently, claiming she was just tired from her new job. Sarah had fabricated an entire fictional workplace for Emma, complete with demanding hours and difficult colleagues, to explain away her sister's increasing absences and fatigue. Miguel, being the oldest, was starting to ask questions. "Why is Mama sleeping so much?" he asked Sarah one afternoon while they colored together. Sarah's hand froze over a crayon. "Sometimes grown-ups need extra rest when they're working hard," she said carefully. "Your mama loves you very much, and she's doing everything she can to take care of you." It wasn't technically a lie, but it felt like one.